God's timing is perfect. He is never early and he is never late. Every door he opens is set by his divine hand, orchestrated with precision and aligned with his perfect plan. Some of you have been waiting, praying, seeking direction, wondering when the breakthrough will come. You've been asking, Lord, when will it be my turn? When will my season change? And I tell you today, God is opening a powerful door for you, but you must be ready. Many times we get impatient. We want things to happen on our schedule, in our own way. But God doesn't operate on human timelines. He sees the end from the beginning. When he opens a door, he does it at the right time, in the right place, and for the right purpose. Think about Joseph in the Bible. He had dreams of greatness, but before he stepped into his destiny, he went through years of trials. Betrayed by his brothers, thrown into prison, forgotten by men, but God never forgot him. In the appointed time, in one single day, God opened a door that no man could shut. Joseph went from the prison to the palace because God's timing is perfect. Some of you feel like you've been in a season of waiting. You feel like doors have been shut in your face, like every opportunity has passed you by. But hear me, just because you don't see the door yet, doesn't mean God isn't working. Sometimes God is preparing you before he opens the door. If Joseph had been promoted too soon, he wouldn't have been ready to lead. Delay is not denial. God's delays are often his way of preparing us, strengthening us, molding us for what's ahead. But when the door opens, we must be ready to walk through it. Many times God opens doors, but people miss them because they're not paying attention. They are so focused on the past, so consumed with their failures, that they don't recognize when God is doing something new. Do not miss what God is doing in this season. When he opens a door, don't hesitate, don't second guess, don't allow fear to hold you back. Step forward in faith. Look at Peter. When Jesus called him to walk on water, the door to the supernatural was open before him. The opportunity was there, but Peter had to make a choice. Step out of the boat or stay where he was. The moment he stepped out in faith, he walked on water, the impossible became possible. But what happened when he took his eyes off Jesus? He began to sink. Why? Because God's timing requires trust. If he opens the door, he will sustain you as you walk through it. And I want to tell you this. When God opens a door, it is not just for your benefit. The blessing that he gives you is meant to be a testimony, a way to glorify him, a way to impact others. Esther was placed in the palace for such a time as this. Esther 4:14. The door was open for her to save an entire nation. But she had to walk through it in obedience and courage. Some of you, God is opening a door not just to bless you, but to use you for something greater. So I ask you today, are you ready for the door that God is opening? Are you watching for it? Are you prepared to step through it? Or will you let doubt, fear, and hesitation keep you from the destiny God has prepared for you? I declare to you today, the time is now. The door is opening. God is making a way. Do not miss your moment. Do not let distractions keep you from stepping into the blessings he has set before you. Trust his timing, obey his voice, and walk boldly through the door he has placed in front of you. Fear is one of the greatest weapons the enemy uses to keep people from walking through the doors God opens for them. It paralyzes, it whispers lies, and it makes you believe that you are not capable, not worthy, not ready. But I tell you today, fear is not from God. The Bible says in 2 Timothy 1:7, for God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. If God has opened a door for you, then he has already given you the power to walk through it. But you must choose faith over fear. How many times have you felt God calling you to something greater, but you hesitated because of fear? Fear of failure, fear of rejection, fear of stepping out of your comfort zone. Maybe you've been holding back because you don't think you're qualified. You look at yourself and say, I don't have enough experience. I don't have the right connections. I don't have what it takes. But listen to me. God does not call the qualified. He qualifies the called. He takes ordinary people and does extraordinary things through them. He took a young shepherd boy named David and made him a king. He took a fisherman named Peter and made him a leader in the church. He took a persecutor named Paul and made him a preacher to the nations. and He can take you and use you for His glory if you will only trust Him and step through the door. But fear will always try to block your way. Think about the Israelites when they stood at the edge of the promised land. God had opened the door for them. The land was right in front of them, flowing with milk and honey, just as God had promised. But what happened? They allowed fear to take over. They saw the giants in the land, and instead of focusing on God's power, they focused on their own limitations. They said, "We are like grasshoppers in our own eyes," Numbers 13:33. And because they let fear rule their hearts, they missed their blessing. They wandered in the wilderness for 40 years because they refused to step through the door that God had opened for them. How many blessings have been lost because of fear? How many God-given opportunities have been missed because people hesitated instead of moving forward in faith? Do not let that be your story. If God is calling you, then He will equip you. If He is opening a door, then He will make a way. You don't have to have all the answers. You just have to trust Him. Faith is not about having everything figured out. Faith is about saying, "Lord, I don't see the whole picture, but I trust that you do." And let me tell you this, faith is not just believing that God can do it. Faith is acting on that belief. Faith is stepping forward even when you don't see the whole staircase. It's what Peter did when he stepped out of the boat. It's what Abraham did when he left his home not knowing where he was going. It's what Joshua did when he marched around the walls of Jericho, trusting that they would fall. Faith requires action. God has a plan for your life. He has prepared opportunities, divine appointments, and powerful doors that will lead you to places you never imagined. But those doors will not open if you stand still in fear. You must walk by faith. You must take that step, even when it feels uncertain. And when you do, you will see that God is already there, waiting for you on the other side. Fear will always try to hold you back, but God is calling you forward. The door is open. Will you step through in faith? And when God opens a door, it often comes with a command. It requires something from us. Obedience. Too many people want the blessing without the responsibility, the opportunity without the commitment, the reward without the sacrifice. But that is not how God works. When He opens a door, He is also calling us to step forward in faith and follow His instructions. Obedience is the key to unlocking the full blessing that comes with the open door. Think about Noah. God told him to build an ark because a flood was coming. That was the open door, a way of salvation, protection, and divine provision. But what if Noah had ignored God's command? What if he had delayed, doubted, or questioned too much? He and his family would have perished along with the rest of the world. But Noah didn't hesitate. He obeyed even when it didn't make sense, even when people mocked him, even when there was no sign of rain. He followed God's command completely, and because of his obedience, he and his family were saved, and God established a new covenant with him. How many times has God opened a door for you, but you hesitated because obedience seemed too difficult? Maybe you felt God leading you to forgive someone, but you held on to bitterness. Maybe He asked you to step into a new job, a new ministry, or a new calling, but you were too afraid to leave the familiar. Maybe He called you to trust Him in a difficult season, but instead, you tried to take control of the situation on your own. The truth is, blessing follows obedience. When God calls you to step through an open door, you cannot afford to hesitate. Look at the story of Abraham. God told him, "Go to a land that I will show you," Genesis 12:01. Abraham didn't have a map. He didn't have all the details, but he obeyed. He left behind everything he knew and stepped into the unknown. And because of his obedience, God made him the father of many nations. The open door led to a blessing that was greater than anything Abraham could have imagined. But it all started with obedience. Many people pray for God to open doors, but when the door finally opens, they hesitate because obedience costs something. It might cost you your comfort. It might cost you relationships. It might require you to let go of old habits, old mindsets, or even old fears. But if you are willing to obey, God will always provide what you need to walk through the door. He will never call you to something without equipping you for it. Think about the widow in 1 Kings 17. She was preparing to eat her last meal with her son before they died of starvation. But then the prophet Elijah came and told her to give him a small piece of bread first. That didn't make sense. She barely had enough for herself and her child. But instead of letting fear rule her, she obeyed. And because of her obedience, her jar of flour and her jug of oil never ran dry for the entire famine. That is the power of obedience. It opens the door for miraculous provision. Some of you are standing before an open door, but you are hesitating because you know that obedience will require something from you. Maybe God is calling you to leave something behind. Maybe He is asking you to trust Him in a way you never have before. Maybe He is leading you into a season where you don't have all the answers and you feel uncomfortable. But I want you to hear this. Obedience is always worth it. When you step through God's door in faith, trusting His plan, you will experience the blessing, favor, and provision that only He can give. So, I ask you today, will you obey? Will you trust Him? Even when you don't understand, will you walk through the door He has opened for you? Because if you do, you will see that His plans for you are greater than anything you could have ever imagined. When God opens a door, you must be aware that the enemy will do everything in his power to stop you from walking through it. He cannot close the door that God has opened, but he will try to distract you, discourage you, and deceive you so that you walk away from it. The enemy knows that once you step into God's purpose, once you move in obedience, once you start walking by faith, you become a threat to his kingdom. So he will use every tactic to keep you from stepping into what God has prepared for you. Distraction is one of the enemy's greatest weapons. He will try to shift your focus away from what God is doing and onto things that don't matter. He will fill your life with unnecessary noise, busyness, and confusion. He will make you worry about things that are out of your control. He will try to burden you with fear, doubt, and anxiety, hoping that you will lose sight of the open door right in front of you. This is why the Bible says in Hebrews 12:2, fix your eyes on Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith. If your focus is on Jesus, no distraction can pull you away from God's purpose. Look at Nehemiah. He was rebuilding the walls of Jerusalem. A door of restoration had been opened, but as soon as he started the work, the enemy showed up. Sanballat and Tobiah tried to distract him, mock him, and discourage him. They even tried to call him down from the wall, saying, come and talk with us. But Nehemiah responded, I am doing a great work and cannot come down. Nehemiah 6:2-3. He refused to let distractions pull him away from the work God had called him to do. That must be your mindset. When distractions come, when people try to pull you away, when the enemy tries to make you lose focus, you must declare, I will not come down. I will not be moved. I will keep walking through the door God has opened for me. But distraction is not the only weapon the enemy uses. He will also try to discourage you. He will whisper lies into your ear. You're not good enough. You're not strong enough. You don't have what it takes. He will remind you of your past failures, your weaknesses, and your struggles, hoping that you will give up before you even begin. But let me remind you, God does not call the perfect, He calls the willing. If He has opened the door, then He has already given you everything you need to walk through it. Think about Elijah. After his great victory on Mount Carmel, when he called down fire from heaven, he expected revival, but instead he faced opposition. Queen Jezebel threatened his life, and suddenly discouragement took over. Elijah, the mighty prophet, sat under a tree and said, Lord, I have had enough. Take my life. He was ready to give up, but God was not done with him yet. God met him in that moment of weakness, strengthened him, and reminded him that there was still more work to do. Some of you have been facing discouragement. The enemy has been telling you that you're not making progress, that you're wasting your time, that nothing is changing. But I declare to you today, do not give up. Do not let discouragement rob you of your blessing. The open door is still before you, and God is still leading you forward. And then there is deception. The enemy will try to trick you into believing that the door God opened is not really for you. He will make it look too difficult, too risky, too uncertain. He will try to convince you that you should settle for less, that you should turn back, that maybe you heard God wrong. He has been using deception from the very beginning. When he came to Eve in the garden, he twisted God's words. He made her question what God had said. And that is exactly what he tries to do to you. He makes you doubt God's promises, doubt your calling, doubt your ability. But let me remind you, God is not a God of confusion. If he has spoken, if he has opened a door, if he has made a way, then you must trust him. You must not let the lies of the enemy shake your faith. This is why the Bible tells us to put on the full armor of God so that we can stand firm against the devil's schemes, Ephesians 6:11. So I ask you today, what has been trying to stop you? What distractions have been pulling your attention away? What discouragement has been weighing on your heart? What deception has been filling your mind with doubt? It's time to recognize the enemy's tactics and stand firm. The door is open. The opportunity is before you. Do not let the enemy steal what God has for you. Walk forward in faith and step into the blessing that God has prepared for you. And when God opens a door, you must be prepared to walk through it without hesitation. Too many people miss their moment because they delay, they doubt, or they allow circumstances to hold them back. The opportunity is there, the invitation has been given, the way has been made clear, but will you step forward? God does not force us to walk through the doors he opens. He gives us the choice. Throughout Scripture, we see moments when people had to decide whether they would seize the opportunity or let it pass them by. Some stepped forward in faith and they saw miracles, blessings, and breakthroughs, but others hesitated and the door closed. Think about the 10 virgins in Matthew 25. They all had the same opportunity. They were all invited to meet the bridegroom, but only 5 of them were ready when the door opened. The other 5 had to run back to get more oil, and by the time they returned, the door was shut. The opportunity was gone. They knocked and pleaded, but it was too late. This is a sobering reminder that when God opens a door, we must be ready to step through it immediately. How many people have missed their God-given opportunities because they waited too long? Because they hesitated? Because they tried to calculate every detail instead of simply trusting God? There are moments in life when you don't have time to debate, analyze, or second guess. You just have to step forward in faith. If Peter had waited too long to step out of the boat, the moment would have passed. If the woman with the issue of blood had hesitated, she might never have touched the hem of Jesus' garment and received her healing. When the door is open, you must move. But hesitation is not the only danger. Some people fail to walk through open doors because they are too attached to the past. They keep looking back at what was instead of stepping forward into what could be. This was the mistake the Israelites made in the wilderness. God had opened the door to the promised land, but they kept longing for Egypt. They wanted to go back to the place of bondage because it was familiar, because it was comfortable, and because of their unwillingness to move forward, they wandered in the wilderness for 40 years. How many people today are still wandering because they refuse to move forward? God has opened doors for them, but they won't walk through because they are still holding on to the past. Past mistakes, past relationships, past failures. But listen to what Isaiah 43:18-19 says. Forget the former things. Do not dwell on the past. See, I am doing a new thing. Now it springs up. Do you not perceive it? If you want to step into what God has for you, you must let go of what is behind you. Some of you have been standing at the threshold of an open door, but you have been afraid to step through. Maybe it's fear of the unknown. Maybe it's the feeling of being unqualified. Maybe it's the voices around you telling you that you can't do it. But I am here to tell you today, if God has opened the door, you don't have to be afraid. He has already gone before you. He has already made the way. He is not asking you to figure it all out. He is simply asking you to trust him and take the next step. Think about Joshua. He stood before the Jordan River knowing that the promised land was on the other side, but the river was at flood stage. It was impossible to cross. But what did God tell him? Step into the water and I will make a way. It wasn't until the priests stepped in that the waters parted. They had to move first. And once they did, God performed the miracle. Some of you are waiting for God to part the waters before you move, but God is waiting for you to step in first. The miracle is on the other side of your obedience. The provision is on the other side of your faith. The breakthrough is on the other side of your step. You will never experience what God has for you if you refuse to move. The door is open. The opportunity is here. Do not miss it. Whatever is holding you back, fear, doubt, uncertainty, past failures, let it go. Step forward. Move in faith. Trust that God has already prepared the way. Because when you walk through the door He has opened, you will step into a season of blessing, breakthrough, and divine purpose like never before.